Bert liked getting out, especially to go to hockey games. So we went together. But leaving his home for just about any reason posed a dilemma for Bert. The games we went to were not professional. They were not even Junior A games. The players were local Tier 2 juniors. Had these games been professional, you could probably buy a beer or even have one delivered to your seat. And at Junior A games, there is often a designated area serving as a beer garden. You have to get it yourself, but you can still get it. But at these games, there was no alcohol served. Bert's dilemma was that he loved to drink. By the end of a whole game without a drink, he would start to visibly shake. It was good for Bert to go without booze for the 3 or more hours a hockey game would keep him from his home. He didn't see it that way. In every room of his place, there was a little something to feed his addiction. The kitchen was well stocked. I knew of a small bottle he kept under the sofa in the living room, and of another in the medicine cabinet of his bathroom. And I'm sure there were other stashes. Bert never had to go too far or wait very long for his next drink, especially when he was at home. So people invited him out to hockey games and to church dinners and other activities where Bert would have little or no access to his liquid nemesis. You might think that there was a conspiracy to keep him from drinking, and you'd be right. He had already lost a job, a large house, a car, his driver's license, and other things through issues related to his alcohol abuse. I would later come to believe research that would link his wife's death to his addiction too. Jean had died in her 40s due to cancer, and in a short span of time, I presided at 6 such funerals of women in their 40s who had been married to alcoholics. The theory is that stress will keep white blood cells from doing their job in our bodies. Spouses of addicts are uniquely stressed. I am still convinced that the stresses endured by these women contributed to their early deaths. Those who were concerned for Bert sought to get him away from home as much as possible. The activities would keep him away from his bottles. In some ways, it's amazing that he kept accepting invitations. A different angle on the same addiction. When I was training for military chaplaincy, one of my colleagues was named Dan. He didn't drink, but he didn't mind if others did. So he offered himself as what would later be known as a designated driver. When we went out and there was drinking, he offered to drive so that everyone would get home safely. Alcohol had been a problem in Dan's family home. Both of his parents had addiction problems. From his own research, he discovered that someone with 2 alcoholic parents, like himself, had about a 90% chance of having his or her own problem. Dan chose not to find out for himself if he had that problem, so he chose not to drink at all. Dan was the most interested participant when part of our training as chaplains included a tour of the Canadian Forces Detox Center in British Columbia. Now, I don't want to pick on people for their addiction today, but alcohol is one of those things that most folks can use responsibly. Most of us can take it or leave it. Responsible use is legal in our country, and in the Bible, St. Paul even recommends wine as an aid in digestion or a remedy for a stomach ailment. So we have a right to use it. But there is a minority of people around us, like Bert and like Dan's parents, for whom alcohol is a problem and a dilemma. This is a place they dare not go. For them, alcohol leaves a trail of destruction, lost jobs, lost privileges, lost houses, lost cars, lost families, lost spouses, and sometimes lost lives. Our passage from Paul's first letter to the church at Corinth tells us our responsibilities in light of other people's weaknesses. The issue raised by the faith community at Corinth for Paul's consideration was not alcohol, but food that had been sacrificed to idols. Most worship involving sacrifices of offerings ends with the consumption of those offerings. Many of the offerings sacrificed in Jewish temple worship were eventually consumed, either by priests or others at the temple, and the temple would sometimes smell like a barbecue. Some offerings were reserved for the poor or the ill. At Corinth, there was a variety of temples and various worship practices. Some of the pagan practices ended in a feast open to all comers, whether they practiced the religion of the temple or not. The food was free to all and came with no strings attached. So the question was, could the good Christians of Corinth partake of such food if it were given to them? Paul's answer was a definite maybe. On one hand, Paul suggests that what we eat is of little concern to God. From the spiritual perspective, God is neither going to be excited nor offended by what you put in your mouths. In other words, eat what you like. There is even a departure here from the kosher dietary laws customary in Judaism. But, and this is a big but, Christians are not only responsible to God for their actions, but to each other as well. So eating would not be a sin against God, but the same activity could be a sin against fellow humans. So beware. This twofold approach to sin was not new. In Judaism and in Christianity, the Ten Commandments, for instance, are often depicted as being on two tablets. However one determines the commandments themselves, and there are about 3 ways to do so, one of the tablets contains the commandments pertaining to God, while the other contains the commandments that pertain to other humans, whether in family or beyond in community. So on one hand, the Corinthians are perfectly within their rights to eat food which has been sacrificed to idols. But Paul goes on to say, be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. You might know what you are doing, and you might be okay with it. But a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. If your activity causes people without this knowledge to go astray, you are responsible for how your action affects their weakness. To extend this concept to our sisters and brothers for whom alcohol is a weakness, we may well be within our rights to consume beer or wine or booze in moderate amounts, both legally and spiritually. But to do so in the company of someone for whom alcohol is a problem would be irresponsible. In our gospel lesson today, we are reminded that Jesus taught with authority and he healed with authority. But Jesus went out of his way to use that authority for the benefit of those who were infirm in body and mind and spirit. Jesus healed completely of body and mind and spirit. And yet he set aside his rightful place so that he could heal our afflictions and make us whole again. The Holy One of God, as is referred to in the gospel lesson, exercised those things which were impure from an afflicted man, that the way might be clear for him to return to health. We are challenged to do likewise. We must exorcise anything within us which would lead us or anyone else astray. And like Jesus, we must set aside our rights and our rightful place for the sake of others. Thanks be to God. Amen.